Good morning. I'm Sean Pritchett. I'm the Director of Finance for the City of Sioux Falls. Last night, we concluded our final budget hearings in our joint meeting with Minnehaha County and Sioux Falls City Council. The budgets for the Siouxland Libraries, Metro Communications, and the Siouxland Heritage Museum were all approved at this joint meeting. Now we will bring forward the entire 2025 budget and 2025 through 2029 5-year capital program, which will be brought forward next Tuesday for first reading with the City Council. All city departments work hard as one team year-round to prepare a fiscally responsible and appropriate budget for the community. Part of this collaboration during the budget planning starts early with the City Council when they host a working session early in the year, as they have in the past few years. Since we've had half of our council change over in May, we have also had opportunities to meet with them individually and in small groups to talk about our city budget, how it's constructed, how it works, and how the city is doing financially. And this has given us many opportunities for feedback and to listen about council priorities. We appreciate this one-team effort to build a budget based on listening to the City Council, our departments, and the administration. Each year, it is a strategic balance to prepare and respond to our city's continued growth while keeping Sioux Falls investable. As I have mentioned previously in the monthly financial updates to the City Council this year, we continued to see signs of softening in our local economy as well as nationally. We recognize and pay attention to this, particularly with our #1 revenue source being sales taxes. And last month, on the July financial statements, which are available online, we did see our largest month-over-month decrease in sales tax revenues since 2020, with sales taxes being down 3.7% in July versus July of 2023. And we saw a moderate increase in our entertainment tax of about 1.7%. Many of this is driven by across the board in different sectors: manufacturing, utilities, lumber, groceries, home furniture, and so forth, continuing to be down, while business services, lodging, and bars continue to perform and increase on a month-over-month basis. Through our responsible budgeting process, we do prepare for these ebbs and flows of the economy and are able to continue the level of services that our residents expect while still planning for transformational initiatives. Some of our financial data is showing that we are trending back to what we would consider normal sales tax revenues versus the boom that we saw in the post-COVID era. Based on conversations with private businesses and residents, we know that many continue to feel the inflationary pressures in a variety of areas, and our businesses continue to struggle with supply chain issues, and the city is not immune to these as well. Just as our residents continually reprioritize where they spend their money based on their personal circumstances, the city follows this same practice. This is reflected in our budget, not only taking care of today, but also making investments and plan for a better tomorrow. A few highlights from the proposed 2025 budget. The total budget is $781 million. More than 70% of the operating and capital expenditures in this budget, which are the expenditures that are mostly impact our citizens, 70% is spent on infrastructure and public safety. Some of the bigger infrastructure projects from Public Works in 2025 include continued work on South Veterans Parkway, construction of the I-29 and 85th Street interchange, investments in Basin 15, which will open thousands of acres of sewerable land on the west side of Sioux Falls, and construction of the third connection to the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System, which continues our investment in the future for water for our citizens. Over $108 million is dedicated to public safety, supporting vehicles, equipment, and personnel for our police department, fire rescue, and Metro Communications. And about $12.5 million is proposed for the housing division. Since Mayor Tenhaken took office, we have collaborated with the City Council and increased our investment in affordable housing by more than 80%. Through partnerships and revolving investments, the housing team has connected more than 2,500 people to resources last year and helped produce, preserve, and rehabilitate 419 housing units for our community. We are budgeting for 28 additional full-time employees in this proposed budget, which includes a housing program specialist for the housing team. The funds budgeted for new full-time employees will also support 7 new police officer, operational support, infrastructure in a variety of capacities, the Oakview Library Branch, and activation of large quality of life investments that we have already made in Jacobson Plaza and the Sanford Recreational Center, which will be the first indoor recreation facility for the city. After an initial delay in May, we were planning to bring forward the Aquatics and Recreation Bond Ordinance separately, but alongside of the 2025 budget. The bond will bring a new outdoor pool experience to Keene Park and an indoor aquatics and recreation center for Frank Olson Park, which we know the community is looking forward to. As we've had more conversations, we decided it would not be prudent for us to bring this forward until after the general election in November. As we talked with the City Council and within our administration and with the public over the last several months, within the monthly financial updates, we've talked about the impact that national elections can have on the bond market. And so we were not planning to bring forward or to actually fund the bond until probably very late this year or early next year anyway. So this change to reconsidering the aquatics and rec bond in November will not jeopardize our existing time frame for our plans related to both Frank Olson and to Keene Park. Through our capital budget process, we prioritize using cash for everyday services that support our community, like infrastructure projects and public safety. We balance this use of cash with occasionally borrowing for large one-time projects, and this aquatics and rec bond is one of those instances. We are at the low end of our debt service compared to other cities. In fact, we have one of the lowest debt service per capita of any city of our size. We are also at the lower end of the trend of our debt service. Right now, spending only about 20% of our sales and capital fund on debt service and funding over 80% typically of the projects that we build and the equipment that we purchase with cash. Waiting to bring this bond ordinance forward for a couple of months does not affect our acquisition or taking over for the West Side Recreation Facility, which remains on target with our expectations to fully take over operations by the end of this year. Our Parks and Rec team is preparing to take over those operations, and we will be releasing more information on what the community can expect from the recreation centers as we go into this fall. Regardless of the economic environment and what's ahead, our city continues to grow with more people choosing to call Sioux Falls home. It's important that we create budgets and focus on investments that are strategic and necessary to impacting our residents today and for future generations. And we believe that we achieved that through this proposed 2025 budget and 5-year capital program, and look forward to the council's first consideration of this next week. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So, can you tell us how much the uncertainty because of IM28, which is the sales tax on consumables, affects the decision to delay the bond?
So it certainly is a factor. There's obviously some uncertainty, which I've spoken of, regarding that initiated measure. Its impact not just on the state, but whether it would impact the city as well. And, you know, there's certainly a lot of confusion around that because we know it will conflict with existing state law. The AG has a certain opinion about it. The Legislative Research Council has a certain opinion about whether it impacts municipalities or not. But irrelevant of what people's concerns are, I think everybody agrees that the confusion around it is significant enough that it's going to require probably judicial clarification or additional action by the legislature. And if that happens, it's going to create this period of uncertainty for us because we will not know what will happen in terms of a revenue side. What we will do is start preparing for, if there is a revenue impact, what that would look like as we go into next year. I also don't think it would be prudent for us to be issuing a bond while we're in that state of confusion. And so if that were to happen, we would likely delay further bringing forward a bond ordinance at that point while we await some certainty as to what our future revenues look like.
Forgive the crudeness of the question. Mm-hmm. It feels like an either or. Either we get pools or we have elimination of the consumables tax. You know what I mean? It feels like, well, we'd like to do this pool, but you know, you're going to be voting on this. We already know the city's opposed to IM-28, that's not a big deal, but is that really that much of a direct correlation between the two? I mean, you said confusion, well, there's...
Right. I wouldn't say it's an either or, but it certainly is a pause, because we would need additional clarification if it does impact us. If it does impact us, then we have to go back and say, okay, based on what we expect the potential revenue loss would be, how are we going to mitigate that? And is this bond something that we can continue to fund as a result of that? And so we just have to, we're always reassessing, readapting, and balancing. But if there is a significant revenue loss to the city, there could be reprioritization. That said, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a major pause for us, though, if it were passing.
You said it's not going to affect the timeline, but you're also calling it a pause. So, I mean, we're pausing on whether or not to get the bonds, but doesn't that ultimately affect the timeline if you decide not to do it?
I wouldn't consider going to November being a pause, because it still aligns with our timeline relative to bringing on architects, things of that nature, that there's a whole period of marketing the bond as well and getting a bond rating. Where the pause would occur is if that initiated measure passes, then it's going to require probably a waiting period for judicial and legislative clarification. And that's going to be a pause. And that pause will take many months to clarify in my mind. That's where the pause would occur.
In terms of the national election and the bond markets, what is are you saying that the outcome of the November election will affect the bond market in a significant way that would change the prospects of the project?
No. Irrelevant of who is elected, bonds get skittish, markets get skittish around election. Doesn't matter who gets elected, and then they settle in after a while. And so we just want to, we've always been advised that being or issuing right in a previous or right after an election can be a little bit more risky, because you don't exactly know what's going to happen in the bond markets during that time period. Things settle in after an election, again, irrelevant of who is elected, and that will happen this time too, based on experience. So it's just prudent to wait until the markets have settled in before we would issue the bonds.
Yeah. Speaking on the timeline of this, back for November here, I believe is what I heard. Do you foresee any kind of major complications getting in the way that, like, we could even push it further back? I know you said you want to wait till like after the election is settled, but outside of that, what other complications do you kind of foresee?
Aside from what I've talked about this morning, I don't have other concerns. All of my conversations with the city council have been good. I feel like they're very supportive overall. And the November timeframe, we're still in the process of bringing on board our architects. There will be contracts and agreements that go along with that. We will go through a bond rating process as soon as this passes, and then we would move forward with marketing the bonds. So timing-wise, the 60-day delay is not significant for 60 days, and we would intend to hopefully bring forward that in November then. Delays beyond that will shift timelines. It will delay the projects from being constructed if we had to delay beyond November at this time.
I believe a huge part of the delay was the city was still looking for a lot of information on not necessarily like outside influences such as the election, but more so inside stuff like planning and all that kind of fun stuff. Do you think the city has enough of that information now to kind of get past that initially stopped it at that first delay?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the delay from May until bringing it forward with the budget, a big part of that, the reason they wanted to delay that was because of not having a fee structure in place for what it would cost for a person to buy a pass, either daily or on a monthly basis or an annual basis to one of the rec centers. And so they just wanted more clarification on that, as well as the cost it would take to run these facilities. And so we spent a great deal of time between May and now, really bringing that information forward, working with the city council, and then ultimately getting those fees approved here in the last month.
Yeah. How often do we really see the city kind of wait for an election like this to pass this kind of, these bonds?
You know, we were talking about this in the past. Usually we've tried to stay away from elections anyway in an election year, whether in a national election or even if it's a congressional election. We try to stay away from those two for the very same reasons of just market volatility. We were talking about this the other day. I don't know that we have recollection that we issued bonds around an election, at least not in recent memory. And we're only issuing bonds for sales tax revenue bonds probably every 3 years. So it's not very often that we go out and do a sales tax revenue bond.
To be clear, the council doesn't have to approve the bond as part of the budget, right? I mean, there really are separate decisions. You were just kind of doing them concurrently, correct?
That is correct. So two things to note there. The budget will include an appropriation to pay the estimated debt service on the bond. So working with our professional financial advisors, we have a good estimate of what we think the debt service is going to be, and that is put into the capital program and is part of the 2025 budget. So that's the part that's inclusive of the budget. In terms of these expenditures occurring, when the bond approves, it automatically amends the budget, and so it just becomes part of the budget as part of that too, in terms of the money that's actually going out the door and being spent for construction.
What is your estimate after the July number of the year-over-year growth in sales tax revenue? You usually have a projection on that.
Right now, we're trending at 1.7. In order to actually meet our budgeted expectations, we would have to hit 7 because we were a little behind on the last year on the growth to be able to cover this year. I don't know how great my crystal ball is, but I would say we'll probably see some improvement as we get into the last several months of the year, mostly based on the fact that we had lackluster growth during that time period last year, so it's going to be easier to grow over that. But I don't know that I would see us probably getting to 4% for the year. If we got to 3%, I think we'd probably be feeling pretty good.
And at 3%, you still don't have to make major changes in the budget?
No, we don't. We wouldn't hit our revenue, but, you know, we have sizable reserves with the city. And so, you know, it might impact, you know, every year we put money into reserves here over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe this year, you know, just depending on how much snow we get this fall and this winter, whether we have to utilize reserves this year or it's whatever it's going to do, it's going to reduce what we would have turned back to reserves or how much we need from reserves in order to cover the expenditures for the year. On the sales tax side, or the capital program side, it's a little bit more challenging because that we don't keep a lot of reserves. It's really cash funded. Those are the infrastructure projects that we're building, roads and equipment that we're buying and all of that. And you know, we've been holding our surplus from last year, which was a little bit of, it's about 4.4 million remaining in that. And that will help cover potentially some of the revenue shortfall we have there. We've also had better performance on investment income because interest rates are higher, and so that's given us a little bit of a relief too.
An expected interest rate cut in September, how does that affect the prospect of the bond, but also just the prospect of growth in city and tax revenue overall?
Well, I mean, if you look at why you reduce interest rates is to really stimulate the economy. And so you would expect that I think it will help loosen things up nationally and provide some optimism that we're toward the end of this inflation fighting period and that we'll get back to more normalcy and people will start going back in and making some additional investments. It will make borrowings easier for individuals and for businesses, which means that projects that maybe weren't penciling out before start to pencil out again. And that's how interest rate changes work, and that's how they're meant to work, and they're a big lever. And so I think it's a positive thing for us, right? Because it means that we're probably at the end of this kind of inflation fighting period. Awesome. Thank you.